May 1918. Daniel Smythe. The old man stared at me from across the chessboard. His half-dead eyes pondered his next move with great intent. I failed to reach for a piece, prolonging my turn as much as possible. We had money riding on this game, and gambling was something which I rarely participated in with chess. I'm horrible at the game itself, to the point that flipping the board would be the closest I could come to properly winning. The real victory would come from learning where this gentleman kept his wallet. When he had reached for his coat pocket, I was elated. Those were always the easiest to pick, and the man appeared to be dozing off. I felt a twinge of remorse, which quickly faded. From the fine suit under his coat, this was obviously some sort of businessman who exploited the less fortunate on a daily basis. He grew rich and fat off of innocent people's suffering, and would show no mercy to me if I were underneath him. Why should I be any better? Besides, he undoubtedly had much more money than just what he was carrying on him. A little donation wouldn't hurt him at all. He was under my heel, and I could crush him like an insect. But I wouldn't ruin him. Action begets reaction, but I would keep myself from going too far. I was simply relieving him of some wealth. I know it must be a burden to have pockets that heavy. And I'm happy to lighten the load whenever someone's feeling a little too weighed down. At least that's what I told myself. The self-righteousness spared what was left of my conscience, but the truth was much simpler. I needed this. If I didn't steal, I would starve. He was entirely asleep now, his head resting upon the table, gently pushing many of the pieces out of place. No one was watching. Trying not to move much, I reached a hand up under the table and into his coat pocket. I clasped the thick leather wallet in my fingers. A rough hand grabbed my wrist. He pulled me closer and leaned in on his own. I could smell the tobacco in his mouth as it formed an ugly grin. "Gotcha, son." I smiled back pleasantly and picked up my cane, gently pressing the tip into a very sensitive spot. "If you would be so kind as to release my hand, I don't want to get any blood on my coat." He let go with a gasp, and I watched the yellow juice fall from his open mouth. I ripped my arm away and tucked the wallet into my breast pocket. The man shouted at me as I fled, but I didn't care. I simply pushed onwards, running into the warm yellow sunset, and disappearing into its nourishing light. With this man having paid the bill, I could survive for weeks. However, the real prize I was after could make all this irrelevant. If I was lucky, I wouldn't have to steal again this year. My blood had filled with gold, and my eyes hardened into diamonds. All that was left was to claim my newfound riches. George Willis was a very wealthy man. He had discovered oil out west, and retired at the ripe old age of 47. His son, Carson, ran the business out there, and George would sit around here and grow wealthier by the minute. It was a good plan, what I would have done in his shoes. 2 weeks ago he vanished. His wife, his daughter, even the maid had followed suit. The police said there was no trace. With the only heir living out west, no one had arrived to claim any of the late Willis's belongings. I, of course, would be more than willing to step in and help those poor souls. Still, I couldn't pull off something of this magnitude alone. I needed a partner, someone big and strong, to help me with the gathering of precious items within the house. Ben was the perfect candidate, a factory worker scraping by on pennies. He was as strong as an ox, and desperate enough to set aside his ironclad morals once in a while. Best of all, He was smart enough to see my side of things while also being dumb enough that nobody other than me could convince him they're right. As I strode up to the Willis house, I could see him waiting on the front stairs. His short and thick black hair framed a rectangular head, which sat perfectly upon a muscular body. I knew he could grow even stronger if he weren't nourished almost entirely by table scraps and beer. He greeted me as I walked up, and I waved him off. Tonight was far too important for such formalities to slow us down. "Did you bring a weapon?" He pulled back his coat to show a small pistol tucked into his belt. I slid my cane sheath back, unveiling the thin blade. "You any good with that thing?" The sarcasm was clear even through Ben's gravelly voice. I laughed along, then replied, "Well, I'm no master fencer, but I can keep the street rats off my back. Fast enough to keep up with small blades, and long enough to give me the advantage. I even fought my way past 5 armed men once. Been a bit uneasy in alleys ever since." I strode over to the lock and examined it. I pulled out a small case, selected the appropriate tool, and the door to my future was open in less than a minute. The smell of pure rot fell upon us as soon as I opened the door. It reminded me of mold, of meat left to spoil, and there was a faint sulfuric odor as well. The house, however, was in fair condition. The living room was pristine, with chairs arranged around the table. A tea set was on that table, glittering in the dim light. The wallpaper was a dull purple, and the drapes a vibrant blue. The whole thing seemed exaggerated and plain at the same time. I began to feel even happier that Willis was gone. The tea set looked to be silver, but there was surely something of greater value than that. "Perhaps down the hall," I suggested, praying to every god I could remember that we'd find something better. Down the hall was the kitchen. The noxious fetor was concentrated here. On the table was a grand feast, set out for the entire family. Not a single bite had been taken of it. Being left to rot, various decomposers, both visible and invisible, had taken control of the area. The roast chicken had the coarse, wrinkled skin of an old man, stripped naked and wearing nothing but an obscene amount of oil. Vegetables dissolved into fluid, with small pieces floating around on the pea-green pods. A cake was set out, with a white frosting that I believed to be entirely mold. A loud crash came from upstairs, followed by a man shouting in a harsh foreign tongue. A woman shouted back in the same language. I tried to recognize it, but the phrases were unlike any human dialect I knew of. Ben's lips parted, but I covered his mouth with my hand. I took his arm and pulled him down to the floor. Together we crawled under the dining table and pulled the tablecloth over ourselves. Loud footsteps came from above, and I could hear them drawing closer. Due more to instinct than reason, I let a single eye watch from under the tablecloth. Standing in the hallway was an obsidian giant. I couldn't be certain that there was anything human aside from the silhouette, as the outer layer appeared to be a thick suit of armor. The person, if it really was a person underneath it, must have been 7 or 8 feet tall. The weapon it held was something like a spear or halberd, but far more crude. It was more like a stone quarterstaff that had been sharpened at one end, to have both a cutting edge and a thrusting tip. I must have gasped under my breath, because they seemed to be drawing closer to our position. I concealed myself again, but it was too late. One swing from that weapon split the table down the middle, and my view of Ben was blocked by a waterfall of unspeakable things. I leapt out from under the table's ruins, only to find another slash aimed my way. I managed to step out of range, but I hadn't yet figured out how to survive for more than the next 15 seconds. 2 bursts of thunder rattled my ears, and I saw that Ben had shot his pistol at the unknown warrior from the side. To our dismay, the bullets had barely left a mark on the stone plate. Ben stuffed the gun back in his pants and picked up a steak knife, now soaked in rot. I was certain that if he managed to land even a tiny cut on actual flesh, our opponent would die of several diseases. It would likely prove useless, though, as the warrior's armor seemed to be nearly impregnable. Despite my careful analysis, there were almost no weak points large enough for my blade to penetrate. I would likely need to target the slit visor, or the connection between the neck and helmet, which appeared to be protected with thick cloth instead of stone. The warrior clearly didn't care about Ben, as they lined up their weapon for a thrust. Gripping my cane in the left, I watched the hungry spear tip split the air. It was almost too fast to react to, but not quite. A deft strike with the cane forced the spear to the side a couple of inches, and lined up my cane to where the tip pointed at its boot. This was as good of an opening as I saw myself getting, so I took hold of the cane with both hands and drew the sword from within. From that angle it took only a slight upward tilt and a rapid thrust before the warrior could recover. The blade slid cleanly into the visor, and the warrior dropped instantly. The woman called down from upstairs. So, the warrior I just killed must have been the man I heard earlier. I took a deep breath, analyzing my surroundings. A slippery floor, a dead warrior, and a shaken Ben. This was not a good place to fight. Sheathing my sword for both comfort and concealment, I charged up the stairs, heedless of Ben's cries for help. The woman's voice continued on in that harsh language, and I followed it to its source. She was equal to her counterpart in almost every way. Size, armament, and language were all the same. The only difference was that I did not fear her. Instead, I took this as a chance to experiment. "Well, hello there. You know, if I met you first, I might actually be worried right about now." I pointed my cane at her as I said this, hoping that nonverbal, as well as verbal language would prove effective. "However, I've already taken down a guy just like you. You're as mortal as I am, and that means I can kill you. So, what now?" Everything I said and did was for the sake of provoking her, and with how much force was put into the slash that would have taken off both of my legs, it seemed to have proven effective. The blade lodged deep in the wooden wall, the slash arousing a cloud of dust. When it settled, the warrior found me standing atop her weapon with my own blade drawn. I delivered a swift kick, instantly regretting it. I had knocked her helmet clean off, sure, but my poor toes! Ah! The sole of my boot had offered precious little protection from that stone, harder than iron. Once the blinding effect of the pain subsided, I was met with a sight that truly stunned me. She wasn't human. She couldn't have been. The first thing I noticed was her light gray hair, compressed by the helmet she had been wearing up until now. This made me think of age, but with her stout face, muscular neck, and tight skin, she would not have appeared a day over 25 as a human. But what skin it was! A soft and luscious gray bed, coated in some sort of powder. Her eyes were granite orbs, and as my fascination grew, I leaned down to observe her more closely. It was odd. Everything about her suggested that she should, and would, have similar mental faculties to a human. She vaguely responded to language, and her harsh shouts to the other warrior would indicate that it was a complete language of their own, rather than some primal noise-making. I didn't know who or what they were, or how they lived, but everything I have experienced up until now would indicate at least society, if not civilization, within this woman's nature. So why did something feel off? As I stared into the eyes of this woman, why did I not feel her soul staring back at me? It was almost the look of those who sought to impair themselves with more than alcohol, but she was not so delirious as them either. It was truly disturbing seeing how close she came to consciousness and independent thought, while not quite being able to achieve it. A loud noise drew both her attention and mine. Ben crashed into the room, brandishing the weapon of the fallen soldier. Seeing his opening, he thrust it forward at the woman's head with devastating effectiveness. She dropped, and I nearly fell as her grip on the spear loosened. But it was nothing I couldn't shake off. Ben was far more surprised. "Who are these people?" I thought for a moment, then replied, "Look around. Willis might have left us some clues as to what madness has engulfed this place." We searched, and Ben soon found a locked safe. I broke through the security in 2 minutes, maybe less. Inside was a note and a parcel. I took the parcel and unwrapped it. It was a large dagger, wrought of black stone. A white gem was embedded in the hilt. The blade was flawless, as if it had never been used. I tucked it into my belt, then turned my attention back to the note. I felt a rush of anticipation as I unfolded it, and began to read it aloud. "Bearer of this note, by whatever means you are reading this, give some thought. You have a chance to escape by putting down this note and running as far away as you can. However, this peril is far more extensive than you know, and threatens many more lives should you choose to flee. If you are still reading this, then know that I will most likely be dead, and you need to understand why, or it's certain that you shall suffer my fate. I had experienced strange noises coming from my basement for some time before, and decided to dig into the walls to look for rats or other vermin. I had only dug a few feet deep before I had located a subterranean chamber. I brought a lantern down and began to investigate. I discovered that this was a complex of tunnels, carved by some ancient civilization which seemed now to be extinct. I stumbled across a large central hall, with a black dagger embedded in the ground. This weapon seemed magnificent, and would look quite nice in my house. I pulled it from the ground and took it back with me. This action must have been what conjured those devils from below. When I next went into those tunnels, I came into the large chamber, and saw that a strange knight was patrolling the hall. He saw me, and chased me through the tunnel for some time. I managed to lose him then, but he found his way up to my home, and brought another of his kind. I watched as they cut down my wife and tore my daughter to shreds. I barricaded myself in this room, but they will get through soon. When I tried to shoot them, the bullets were ineffective. These two are quite strong, but they are clearly not alone. The civilization below was silent, but in my foolishness I woke them, and now they can break through to our world. They know we're here. My current theory is that these caves go on for miles, perhaps even to an underground city where the leader of these Black Knights resides. The only way for us to endure is to eliminate any threat from the other side. Do this, or our world shall likely not survive whatever they're planning down there. I have also encased in the false back of this safe $10,000 in cash. If you succeed in saving this world, I implore you to purchase my home from whoever may inherit the deed, and live on in this place to ensure that no one else can learn what I have. The very knowledge alone is too dangerous for humanity to possess. I should have liked to reveal more, but I fear my time is growing short. It will not be long until I am caught and thoroughly mangled. Farewell, reader. Ben sat against the wall. Well then, he said, a sardonic tone trying to force the fear out of his shaking voice. We need to tell the police. They'll keep us safe. I drew my sword and pointed it at him. He stopped, and his eyes grew wide. He opened his mouth to speak, but I was faster. The police will do nothing but lock us away. We broke into this house and killed 2 people. I alone have done much more, and would barely even have a trial before spending the rest of my life in a cell. You are almost nobody, and would be dismissed as such, potentially to face the horrors of a madhouse. Aside from this note, and the corpses on the floor, the police have no reason to believe us and would do nothing. And while we're at it, think of the bigger picture. The Great War has been raging for 4 years with no end in sight. All of this world's great armies have been weakened considerably due to this. As of now, if there are too many of these soldiers waiting down there, they could take this world by storm. We are the only people who know, who have seen these inhuman soldiers with our own eyes. We are the ones who must stand against this menace. Now, I am going to take this dagger and do what I can to stop all this. Will you join me, or shall I save you some time and run you through here and now? Ben chuckled. Come now, Mr. Smythe. You're a thief, not a murderer. But these people clearly don't share your high moral standards, and I wouldn't like to see their plans for our world. I'll come with you, if only to keep myself safe. I laughed and put my sword away, but a tear had formed in my eye, for his words cut deeper than he could know. I had killed a man tonight, in the heat of battle. I'd killed several by now during fights, come to think of it. If Ben was unwilling, I should have killed him too. But he was right. I couldn't stab someone in the back. Deep down, I knew continuing on this path meant that I would have to murder someone in cold blood, with no other intent but to kill them. And I hoped that I'd be strong enough to do it then. But now was not the time for such thoughts. We needed to push onward. In the basement, we found the hole mentioned in Willis's note, but it had redo from in the basement in 3, 2, 1. In the basement, we found the hole mentioned in Willis's note, but it had been dug out to be slightly larger than a man. Ben and I stepped through, light pouring softly from the lantern in my hand. The chamber was carved from black stone. Intricate designs were carved into the walls, indicating a very proud and artistically minded race, with great attention to detail. The carvings seemed almost alive, flowing with ancient energy. We pressed on into the tunnel. The brilliance of the chamber was gone, replaced now by a shoddily dug hole, barely even considerable as a tunnel. Luckily, the dirt around us was compacted, or there may not have been a tunnel at all. The scent also became more rank as we proceeded, resembling something unlike any smell on earth. The tunnel started to open again, and we soon found ourselves in another stone chamber. I looked around, and could see no end to the chamber on the far side, so I called out to check for an echo. Several voices yelled in reply, in that inhuman language. I didn't know if it was relieving or terrifying that some of the words seemed to resemble English more closely. A memory came back of that day, when 5 men with batons and bowie knives tried to corner me. My possessions consisted of my sword cane and a deck of playing cards. All aces, naturally. There were 2 on one side of the alley and 3 on the other. Rather than unsheathe my sword, I fanned the cards in my left hand and held the cane aloft in my right. Of the 3 men, 1 was barefoot. He would be my target. I made like I was going to attack the 2 men, which led the 3 to advance. A quick toss their way, and the air was filled with cards. Watching an ace of hearts fall, I saw those exposed toes and knew my plan had succeeded. I brought the end of my cane down upon them, relishing in the crunch as I shoulder-checked the man out of my way, and ran for my life. Oh, I wish I could do the same here. The soldiers marched haughtily out of the darkness, brandishing their staves. Ben readied his own staff, but I kept my sword sheathed. As long as they thought it was a simple cane, I could still potentially catch one of them by surprise and make this fight a bit less overwhelming. Suddenly, one of them cried in agony and fell to the ground. A stone knife, more a spike than a proper blade, protruded from his visor. They halted and 2 more fell. The soldiers scattered, charging into the darkness and twirling their weapons, hoping to slash whatever invisible attacker was picking them off. It was a truly confusing sight to behold. A young woman emerged from the darkness. She was clad in rough cloth, with sparse pieces of stone armor attached to her rags. Her face was similar to the others in shape, but her skin was unnaturally pale, as if sunlight had never graced it. Her hair was a mess of white, shortly chopped without skill or care. She drew 2 more knives and leapt through the air at one of the soldiers. She tackled him, sliding the blade professionally through his throat, then threw her other knife into another's visor. Her opponents circled around her, trying to regain their composure. She retrieved her spare blade, but did not immediately attack again. A soldier stepped behind her and lunged at her back. She turned in response, grabbed his weapon under her arm, and poked her knife through his eyes, then threw him in front of her to block another strike. The woman stabbed 2 more, then latched on to the final man's weapon. After forcing it out of his hands and into his neck, she retrieved her knives. "Stay back," I told Ben, not quite ready to draw my own sword. This feral woman was a dangerous opponent. To be honest, I didn't know how a fight between us would play out. She broke into a run, then sprang at me. I ducked under her and flicked my cane out, striking at her belly. I didn't hit too hard, but she was certainly feeling it. She pivoted midair, facing me as she landed. I took my cane with both hands, then braced myself as she struck. She sliced at me with blinding speed, but I deflected every blow. I followed with a strike to her hand, which managed to knock the knife away through sheer force. Spinning around, I landed a sidekick to her belly. She staggered backward, and I maintained distance for a second, just in case it was a feint. The feral woman threw herself at me in desperation, and I caught her remaining blade. She was a lot stronger than she looked, and I knew that if the grappling lasted for more than a moment, I would be at her mercy. We were in a deadlock for several seconds, but I then gave way and let her arm slip through, forcing her off to my side. I brought out the sword, and by the time she had recovered, it was resting on her throat. "I am Daniel Smythe," I stated, "and this is Ben. Who are you?" She seemed not to be bothered by the presence of my blade, but also made no further move to attack. I don't quite remember. Clara seems familiar, so call me that. In any event, I have been here longer than you, and that would mean that you're trespassing in my home. Now why would you be doing that? I thought for a moment, then replied, We are not your enemy. Quite the opposite, in fact. There is an entire world above these caverns, and these warriors here would do great harm to its people should they be left to their own devices. We are here to put a stop to this invasion. The woman crossed her arms. Invasion? They've been here for as long as I can remember, patrolling around and making sure that nobody touches that fancy knife. It's not my fault they got mad when somebody did. Besides, these people are how I survive. I eat their flesh and cleanse myself in their blood. Without a steady supply of them, I wouldn't last down here. So why shouldn't I get back up and kill you? You look funny, but you probably taste the same as them. I gasped in horror. A knot of dread formed in my stomach as I realized the cannibalistic nature of the person before me. I quickly thought of something to appease her. If we succeed, we can bring you food from above. We can bring you water to drink and bathe in. We can give you a better life. All you have to do is let us see this through. Her eyes glittered, and she lunged at me, grabbing onto my coat. I was taken by surprise, but felt that retaliation was unnecessary by the innocent joy that radiated from her. Water? You have so much water you can bathe in it? I can only drink it from leaking cracks in the stone. Sometimes I can't even get any water from there, and need to drink their blood instead. If you would be willing to bring me water, and food too. This is better than I could have imagined. Way better. But before you feed me, I will feed you. Come back to my shelter and rest. I've just caught us a feast, and I'm happy to take care of you for some time to help prepare you for your endeavor. I was shocked at her outburst of friendliness, but willing to take advantage of the situation. Very well, we shall come with you. Ben, get one of these people out of their armor. It would seem we have a very different type of meat on our menu. You can't be serious. I walked up to him. Look, we need to accept her hospitality. If she really wants us dead, she'll be eating Danielle Mignon with a side of Ben's stew. I don't mind a lady appreciating my body, but that's a bit much, don't you think? She likes us for now, so let's keep it that way. Ben nodded solemnly, his face contorted with disgust. She had led us back to her chamber, which was a small dugout at the end of a tunnel. Water leaked through cracks in the walls and soaked into the dirt floor. The back corner of the room was a large pile of dirt which served as a bed. In the other corner, a makeshift stove was set up, consisting of a small hole to burn armor padding and a breastplate which served as a stovetop. It was one of the best meals I had ever tasted. The fire dimmed, and we were all sleepy. Go on, Clara said, an oddly loving tone in her voice. Go and sleep. The dirt pile can keep you quite warm if you bury yourself deep enough. Ben shot up at this, and looked worriedly over to me. Now, Mr. Smythe, this has been strange enough. I could barely tolerate the meal, and now you want that we should sleep next to her, and give her an opportunity to do just about anything to us while we sleep? No, I won't do it. I sighed. Ben, if it matters that much to you, I'll stay up, and you two can sleep. It was settled. The two of them tucked in on opposite sides of the pile, and I took up a guard position near the door, settling in for a long night. Clara. I opened my eyes. I was laying on a bed of soft ash. Loud crashes echoed around me. I looked up. There was no roof. Instead, it was all grey, with flashes of dim light around me. Bursts of light danced across the open roof. I began to sit up. A hand rested on my shoulder, and a voice called out. "Well, I certainly hadn't expected to see you again." I began to turn, but saw only a swirling vortex of ash reaching up into the heavens. I woke suddenly and flopped about, sending dirt flying everywhere. The dream felt so real. I looked over at the one called Daniel Smythe, who sat by the fading embers. He hadn't even turned around at my outburst. Instead, he just sat there, all comfy and cozy in his long clothes. I walked over to him. "Go to sleep," I said, hoping he could still hear me. "I'll keep watch for the rest of the night." He turned around and opened his mouth like he had something to say. He didn't actually talk, though. He just wrapped a hand around me and let his head lay on my forearm. I figured that must have been how his people express gratitude. I found it pretty comforting, too. After a few seconds, he crawled over to the dirt pile and collapsed. I breathed a sigh of content and sat down in the corner. Still, my heart was pounding as the cacophony echoed in the silent room. Daniel. I woke to a hand on my shoulder. Clara smiled down at me and handed me a chunk of charred meat. I ate it as I looked around the room. Ben was already awake, resting by the fire pit. Clara was sharpening her knives. "Well, Ben, I do believe it's time to go." Clara stood up, knife in hand. "I can't let you do this." Ben leapt up, aiming his staff. "I knew it! We couldn't trust her then, and we can't trust her now. You should have killed her off when you had her pinned." Clara, as any good feline would, hissed as she glared at him. "As I was saying, I can't let you do this alone. I haven't got a life down here. I just survived the only way I know how. You promised me a chance to escape this, and I intend to see that you're alive and well to make good on your end of the bargain. I'm not asking for you to let me help you. I'm telling you I'm coming with you." Ben accepted this and lowered his weapon. I walked over to her. "So, Clara, we are looking for wherever it is these people come from." Clara smiled. "Why, yes," she began. "I know exactly what you're looking for. That just so happens to be my favorite hunting ground. They come from out of the cracked air. We'll have to fight our way in, though. No way around. So do whatever you must to keep yourselves alive." I had no idea what this cracked air was, but I tried to imagine it as we traveled. Clara led us through the ruins, and with her guiding us, the journeying felt much faster. We reached the inner sanctum in minutes. It was a large room, with several warriors patrolling the grounds. In the center, Clara's cracked air sat, a rift in the fabric of reality floating above a raised altar. It wasn't particularly remarkable when viewed in the dim light, but the uncanny way that it glistened might have terrified a more superstitious man. The air was distorted, in the same way that the air above a flame dances with an unnatural shimmer. It was at once a well-cut diamond and a fractured window pane. The soldiers stopped moving. Slowly they all turned around to face us. "Ben, stay close to me." I drew my sword as I said this, and switched my grip to hold the sheath as a baton. Clara charged in head first, a whirlwind of blades which felled 3 in seconds. Ben swung wildly at one of them. The soldier deflected his strike, then brought his spear around. Ben blocked the weapon, but was slowly overpowered as the blade gently cut into his belly. He screamed, falling over, As the soldier pulled his weapon back, I leaped over Ben and rammed my blade through his enemy's visor. Clara finished off the last two, and I sheathed my blade. Ben writhed in pain, and I lifted up his shirt. The spear hadn't cut deeply. It was a clean wound and seemed to miss any vital organs. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small bottle of absinthe. It was quite useful for coercing information, but it should serve well enough to clean the wound. I slowly poured it onto the wound. Clara pinned him down, and I finished pouring it out. I took out a roll of gauze which I had intended to bandage myself with, and used it on him instead. That's all I can do. It's not too late. We can still take you back up and get you to a hospital. Ben scoffed. Mr. Smythe, I've committed to this just as much as you. I will stay and fight, even if I must do it with a hole in my belly. I was shocked. I knew he was strong, but to think that he would fight through this, it was simply amazing. I suppose I had brought him along for the ways that he was better than me, and this was only one of many. We sat there for a few minutes, until Ben had recovered enough to move. We gathered around the break in the air, this rift. It sparkled like no gem I had ever seen before, but at the same time it also devoured all light that passed it. In fact, I could feel a slight breeze from air being pulled into this thing. I looked over at Ben and Clara. While it was possible that this rift could be a one-way journey, it was also the only way onward. I saw this truth in their eyes, and together we stepped into the cracked air. Ben. We were only in the dark for a second or two. Soon we fell out and landed on a bed of soft gray sand. No, not sand. Ash. I looked up, stunned by the world that surrounded me now. A true wasteland stretched out before me. The land was mostly empty, with a few occasional crops of some sort of large weed. The plants were also gray and looked like dead trees. No animals in sight. The sky was covered in storm clouds, but no rain fell. Purple lightning tore across the sky, occasionally striking the ground. The land was riddled with large chunks of some black rock. There was a single mountain off in the distance that seemed to be made entirely of this stuff. The mountain looked as if it had been sliced in half sideways by some giant blade. The entire place made me feel like we traveled to God's ashtray. I looked over at Mr. Smythe and Clara, and they were just as shocked as me. "What now?" I asked, seeing no signs of life. Clara said, "Can't you see those markings? There on the side. Those clearly aren't natural. They were definitely made by someone. If we're looking for where those warriors came from, that's our best chance of finding them." I still couldn't see anything, but good Mr. Smythe didn't protest, so I went along with him. A few hours later, we arrived at the base of the mountain. My wound kept me from moving quickly, but we still made it there. We stood in front of a primitive city. A wall of hardened ashes covered the whole place, with only one stone gate. A grand staircase rose up far above the rest of the city, leading to the flattened peak of the mountain. There were no alternate paths, nothing carved into the mountainside, just a straight shot to the flattened peak. Mr. Smythe shouted, and a single guard walked up to the gate. "We have come to speak to your leader," he called. "It is a matter of great urgency. Lives are at stake." The guard said nothing. He didn't react at all. Out of nowhere, Clara fell over. She twitched violently for a few seconds, then stopped. "She wants us to come. She's waiting on the peak." Clara had a certain look of fear welling up in her eyes. I'd seen that look in a puddle's reflection when one of many barkeeps threw me out. Mr. Smythe knelt beside her. "Who is she? What did she do to you?" The girl convulsed. Foam rolled down her lips. She gagged, then vomited onto the ash. Clara gave me the creeps normally, but the final howl which rang from her throat filled me with pure terror. "Don't try my patience! Get up to the peak now!" Clara's eyes rolled back, and she stopped moving. Mr. Smythe quickly put his hand near her face. "She's still breathing. Whatever happens, she'll live. Let's wait a moment longer, give her a chance to come to. I don't want to go against this mysterious voice, but it'll be much easier if we aren't dragging her up those stairs." Clara sat up, panting heavily. What happened? I was too surprised to respond. Mr. Smythe stammered, We need to get up to the peak, now." The stone door creaked open. Daniel. We strode through the gate into the city. It was barren, with only a few soldiers milling about in the distance. The tiny collection of ashen huts, which served as the city's sad interior, meant a great view in most directions. A small battalion approached us. I motioned for Ben and Clara to hide, and we ducked behind the nearest house. I peeked around the corner, watching them come closer. One of them raised their hand about 100 feet out, and the soldiers broke formation. Had they seen us? With Clara we might be able to take them, but I'd rather not delay in getting to the peak. I doubted whatever was waiting up there would be patient, and there was still a slim chance to solve this somewhat peacefully. It was then that I noticed something rather odd. The soldiers had reformed and pointed their weapons outward as if they were afraid. The ash around their feet shifted oddly. 5 or 6 gray shadows leapt out of the ground, kicking the ash up into a cloud as they did so. The confusion hid most of them, but I could make out one clearly. It wasn't a shadow, but a man wrapped in a gray cape. He carried a stiletto in one hand, and a short forked spear in the other. It was like one of the soldiers' weapons, but with an additional blade that poked out sideways, and a handle about 2 feet shorter. Now that the ash was settling, I could more clearly make out what was happening. The assassins leapt at and over the soldiers, and struck with the precision and grace of trained dancers. They would turn away the stone warriors' strikes with their spears, then finish them with a stiletto to the eyes or throat. One of the shadows even leapt right at the soldiers, and as he did so, I saw 2 spikes on the toe of his stone boot. To my simultaneous amazement and horror, the spikes slid right into the visor of the soldier's helmet. As the assassin leapt off of his victim, I noticed the gray fluid left on the boot. Each one was much like a great gray owl on the hunt, silently snatching their helpless prey. It was masterful and utterly terrifying as a result. The soldiers never stood a chance. One of them barked a command, though I was too far away to hear it clearly. They raced toward the wall as if they were trying to break through it. At the last moment, they jumped into a flying kick. The spikes on their boots dug into the side of the wall. They dashed up the side, and all but one of them vanished over the top. One of the shadows barked a command, though I was too far away to hear it clearly. They raced through the wall, as if they were trying to break through it. At the last moment, they jumped into a flying kick. The spikes on their boots dug into the side of the wall, and they dashed up the side. All but one of them vanished over the top. To my horror, however, one stopped and turned to face me. I found myself wishing that we had taken more steps to conceal ourselves, but it was far too late now. The last assassin raised their arm in some sort of gesture, but I couldn't make out what it was. They didn't stick around to elaborate on their meaning, choosing instead to rejoin their comrades. Not looking to encounter anyone else who might want us dead, we ran directly to the stairs up the mountain and began to climb. As we reached the summit, the lightning seemed to intensify. It was already violent enough to illuminate this world despite the lack of a visible sun, but now it took on an almost blinding quality. I wondered if it was just that we were closer to the source of the light, or if there was really something that eagerly awaited us. We climbed to the summit and looked around. The desolation atop this mountain had been converted into a sort of throne room. A large stone table sat at the center, with many chairs surrounding it. All of them were heavily damaged save one. The throne at the head of the table, that is. It was utterly pristine and seemed to be designed much more intricately than the other chairs. Upon that throne was a pale woman. She was massive, not due to muscles or fat, but a skeletal structure which was quite visible in places. Her pure white skin clung to her frame desperately. Her lips were stained black, and her veins were a similar color, like cracks running along her porcelain form. Her left eye reminded me of an emerald, the vivid green reflecting flashes of light. Her right eye was a mass of scar tissue that ran down her cheek, almost touching her mouth. Furthermore, her facial bones on the side seemed to have slightly eroded, leaving a small dent in the side of her head. A long mass of well-kept black hair rolled down her shoulders. Resting upon her brow was a stone diadem, with a white gem in the center. I would expect such a woman to wear an elegant gown, or perhaps a suit of armor, but her body was covered only by a plain robe. The implied statement of clothing that provided no protection was clear. This woman was quite dangerous. She rose from the throne, slowly and deliberately, but did not step much closer. A grin spread across her face, betraying the sick, sadistic happiness of a cat toying with a mouse before delivering the fatal blow. "Well, what is it? What have you come to say to me, Lorgani, ruler of Sychnir and last surviving divinity? You are not of this world, and have traveled far to hold counsel with me. Due to this act of reverence, I'll honor your efforts and permit you to speak." I hesitated. I was so sure of myself in Willis's mansion, even when facing powerful warriors far stronger than Ben or I. Despite this, something unseen in the quality of this woman shook me to my very core, as if I was in the presence of an actual living goddess. Her eye fell upon mine, but I nudged Ben forward, hoping that he would take the lead. He began to stammer, but steadied himself quickly. "We come from the other side. We aren't sure why you've invaded our world, but we have come to end any further threat. Would negotiation be possible?" I admired Ben's strength of will against this divine specter. It was more than I could even feign at the moment. However, at the mention of negotiation, she let out a deep, guttural laugh. "Invade? You remind me of that Willis man. Can you believe that he actually considered a handful of scouts an invasion force? Yes, of course. You must be from the same place as him. Your Earth. You needn't explain. I personally milked Willis for as much intelligence as he could provide. That's why I can confidently assure you that your fears are justified. As for negotiations, I think not. If we were to negotiate, what reason would I have to honor any terms? It would only be a waste of time. Still, I am quite merciful, as befits a divinity. You may submit yourselves as my personal slaves. It would be quite fun to keep a pet or two from your world. If that doesn't suit you, I'll permit you to leave this place peacefully, and run as far as your frail bodies can carry you. If you please, you can run all the way back to your precious home and wait for my coming. I'd advise you to make your choice quickly. The last man who tried my patience was Willis, and he was thrown into the pit. My response was immediate. I'll join you. Ben and Clara both turned in shock, as if I had lost my wits. But could they even blame me? Morgani cocked her head in amusement. That was rather sudden. Yeah, it was. I suppose that must make me look rather suspicious. It's an easy choice, I began, as panicked beads of sweat made their way into my eyes. I'll tell you straight, because I doubt I could hide this, no matter how hard I try. Lorgani, you terrify me. I can't even fully say why, but I've just had this sensation of pure danger ever since I saw you. I don't even want to know what you'll do to me if I refuse your offer. The divinity, Lorgani, was smiling at this. Not bad. The wrath of a living goddess is to be feared, but you should have picked up on something else as well. It's love. I feel nothing but love for those under my control. You made the right choice, darling. I shouted to Ben and Clara as I walked over to my new mistress. Farewell, my friends. May you live a peaceful life, however far you must run to achieve this. Lorgani laughed again, as I bowed my head and walked past her, taking my place just behind. Mr. Smythe. Ben's voice held a profound form of dejection. I could draw my sword and stab her now. No, I could not take the risk of betraying her upon our first meeting. If she turned around, if I missed a vital organ, the punishment would be quite severe. Instead, I flashed Ben a subtle wink, which he seemed to take note of. Clara began to speak, a defiant growl under her voice. Listen here now. I don't care who or what you are. I suffered for many years, fighting daily just so that I could eat. These people offered me a better life, one of plentiful food and drink, and I won't stop until I have it. I've hunted your warriors for as long as I can remember, and refined my techniques so thoroughly that they don't even pose a threat to me. If you stand in my way, then I'll just carve my path right through you. Ben opened his mouth, but Clara flashed him a quick glare, which silenced him. Lorgani began to pace about in front of me. I could sense some sort of dark power awakening so very close to me. The ash of the throne room swirled under our feet, spiraling toward her. It was all converging at Lorgani's feet. So, another blasphemer. Surely you don't believe that you could stand against the divinity? But regardless of your intent, such insolence cannot go unpunished. This should be fun. Clara growled and charged in, knives glinting. Lorgani tripped her, and as she fell, a cloud of ash burst up into her face. Falling to the ground. Redo from falling in 3, 2, 1. Falling to the ground, Clara coughed up what looked like pounds of ash. Morgani flew at Ben, who tried to back away. She picked him up by his throat, carrying him over to the long stairs leading down. With a soft grunt, she threw him over the edge. Ben rolled quickly, but his progress was stopped by a stone boot catching him in the ribs. 2 of Lorgani's soldiers had climbed the stairs and intercepted him near the peak. She now turned back to Clara with her teeth fully bared. As Clara slowly regained her footing, Lorgani jumped high into the air. A thin ribbon of lightning came down from the sky, striking the tip of Lorgani's index finger. I watched as she pirouetted midair, hurling the bolt down onto Clara as she fell. The bolt hit Clara squarely in the back, knocked her to the ground in an instant. Clara groaned in pain, her movement gone. You know what? Redo from the bolt in 3, 2, 1. The bolt hit Clara squarely in the back and knocked her to the ground. I walked over to what I hoped wasn't a corpse, holding my hand to her face to check for breath. She's still alive. I uttered this out of sheer amazement. How did she survive? The guards will tend to her, for I have something special for people like that. It's what I would have done to you, should you not have taken my offer, or have taken my offer only to betray me. But now is not the time for such thoughts. I shall send a legionnaire to escort you to a home, and provide you with Zythor, our nourishment. You needn't worry about language differences. Now that you've encountered me, you and the people of Sycanir will always understand each other. Most of our city's infrastructure is underground, and consists of barracks for the Legion, so you'll want to grow accustomed to that. For now, leave me. I have business to settle. I shuddered in fear, but I knew fully that I would have to play along with this charade if I would ever see my home again. Ben! I stirred, reluctant to move. My entire body ached from the fall, and I doubted that I could even stand. The sickly sweet taste and smell of my blood only made my torn muscles and shaken bones feel even weaker. Maybe I should just wait here, and keep acting like I was still unconscious. A sharp kick hit my injured chest, and I rolled over with a moan. A soldier stood above me, poised to strike with his weapon. He motioned toward a group of people, all dressed in rags. Soldiers gathered around them, and I was quite sure that even if we all fought back, the soldiers would put us down quickly. I muddled over to them, and the soldier watching me fell into line with the rest. We began to march. I looked around and saw that we were already outside the city. One of the prisoners came up to me, an old man in rags. He wore a circlet of rolled cloth around his head. He was appallingly haggard, and his face was neutral in its infinite wrinkles, but his eyes held an intense ferocity. "So, new blood, what's your name?" His voice was gravelly, as if he had inhaled too much of the ash. "I'm Ben." I was scared of what the man might do, so I whispered my name. He glared at me for a second, then laughed it off. "Well, well, a little nervous, are we? Good. You should be afraid, outsider. Our dearest divinity has been keeping this lot out in the desert for a while now. No food, and no shelter. We would have rebelled already, but she's kept us too well guarded. I don't know what she's got planned for us, but you would do well to keep your guard up." He walked away, and my heart sank as his words echoed in my ears. Daniel. The interrogation was long and intense. Lorgani had wanted to know everything about me personally. She hadn't cared for details about society, like current politics or religion, and I could only assume that she had learned plenty from Willis. Instead, she focused on things like my lifestyle, ideology, and combat experience. I told her almost everything I knew. I sensed that she would be able to see through any lies or embellishments. I even drew my sword cane and let her swing it around for a moment. I did, however, neglect the detail of the black knife. I couldn't say why, but my instincts told me to leave it be. She was quite entertained to learn that I was a common swindler. "How about that? All that poise and dignity, and it turns out you're just a petty thug. Well, appearances certainly are deceiving. Don't worry, darling. You've chosen to submit to me, so I'll take excellent care of you. You won't have to do anything so vulgar again, as long as you remain at my side." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. It didn't make much sense to think of my long-term goals with someone I would eventually kill. Still, she seemed to find my presence endearing. Lorgani acted tough, but as long as I let her think she was controlling me, she clearly enjoyed my company. It interested me that someone so uncanny and inhumane would fall victim to the same loneliness as the humans she studied. Such things are exploitable, after all, in both myself and in her. Ben. Marching. Nothing but marching until our legs gave out. I could barely stand with my wounds, yet those fiends made us march far out into the desert. The old man had seemed to have given up hope, and I wasn't far behind. Daniel. Lorgani led us, along with a small battalion, into the wasteland. We reached the large pit, with a tiny little terrace watching over it. Another battalion arrived, marching a group of rugged prisoners in tattered robes. They were forced to slide down into the soft pit. The other battalion dropped their spears in. The prisoners quickly armed themselves, as I expected, and Lorgani led me over to the terrace. The battalion followed us. They dragged something alongside them. They came forward in response to a gentle wave from Lorgani. The something was Clara. She was bound and wearing a similar robe to the prisoners. The back of this robe was soaked in strange pink blood, and cuts on her neck and shoulders were apparent. I gasped, and Lorgani placed a hand on my shoulder. "Oh, my darling pet, is your friendship starting to cloud your judgment?" My heart sank as I realized what was happening. This was to be a test of my loyalty. "No," I leaned casually on my cane, struggling to keep my composure. "For what is friendship in the face of a divinity? Any kinship between us is gone. Like a guiding light, your radiance outshines anything I have ever seen." She smirked and hoisted Clara, who was aimlessly struggling against her bonds. Lorgani sliced through them with a small blade, then threw her into the pit below. She called out, I've been starving you for a long time now, but I was feeling generous today. This pest tried to attack me, and in my own throne room, tear her apart, and leave nothing left to bury. I stifled another gasp. To think that she could be so brutal. Then again, it was Clara. I suppose cannibalism, like any other form of hostility, goes both ways. The prisoners were uneasy. They shifted about nervously, none of them daring to approach her. I couldn't be sure if they were actually reluctant to hurt her, or if they just didn't think they'd be able to. A man stepped out from the crowd, hobbling on a spear. His face was coated with ash, but I recognized him nonetheless. Nausea overtook me as Ben drew closer. Clara. Lorgani's command stood. I was to be executed, by whatever means, and Ben was to be the executioner. It wasn't enough that she had spent a great deal of time demanding information I couldn't provide at the end of a whip. It wasn't enough that she lashed me even harder after she accepted that I didn't know what she was talking about. For whatever reason, she just wouldn't be satisfied until my bones had been picked clean. I looked over at Daniel, and though his face was stoic, I could see the pain in his eyes. Ben strode over to me. He readied his weapon. I flinched, but he held it out, as if to give it to me. When we first met, I didn't trust you. I still don't think I would if I had a choice. Just take it. Don't make me regret this. I took the staff from him and replied, "Get behind me. I'll keep us safe, one way or another." The prisoners noticed this and huddled up. They began to chant. It was slow and soft, but grew into a roar. Ah, rah, goose! Ah, rah, goose! Ah, rah, goose! The crowd parted, and an old man came forth. He held a spear in one hand and a short sword in the other. I realized, with a chill, that the spear was the same variety wielded by the assassins lining the city. He leaned on it, as if he were using it as some form of prop, but I was quite suspicious of this. He hobbled up to me, and I began to feel as if he was holding back, as if he wanted to kill me in so many ways, but kept himself from doing so. He swept at me with the spear. I caught it with the tip of my own staff, and he pressed himself close to me. Despite the distance between us, he did not plunge his sword into me. Instead, he began to speak. "You've begun the festivities far too early, but I can still get us out of here. We just need to buy some time, so let's put on a good show." He shoved me away and backed off of his own accord. He pushed my staff away and backed off to separate us by about the length of our weapons. I wondered for a second what he was planning, but there was no time to think. I sprang into action, bringing my blade around to face him, and following up with a heavy thrust. He deflected my thrust with his spear, and I barely had time to bring the handle of my staff up to meet a crushing overhead swing from his sword. He spun around with a flourish, as if his goal was to dance rather than to fight. His spear tip flicked out from behind him and cut my face. It would have sliced my head off if I was any closer. I gasped in shock, but my reaction, though delayed, was still fast. I forced the tip of the... Redo from I forced in 3, 2, 1. I forced the tip of my staff into the ground, and used the momentum of that action to flip myself and the weapon over him. I followed with a sweep at his legs that seemed to catch him off guard. He fell, but just as I had hoped, he rolled out of it before my next strike could land. He dropped his weapons and pulled my left leg out from under me. As I fell onto my back, he picked up his spear and raised it high above his head. "Now, my brethren!" His cry rang out across the plains, and the ash seemed to rally to it. The rim of the pit bustled with life as the grey-robed assassins stood up. Morgani was shaken, and Daniel drew his sword, but she motioned to something, and he put it away. As he did, Morgani wrapped one of her arms around Daniel's chest, and one around his thighs. She held him aloft gently, and I could see on Daniel's face that he didn't know what to say or do now that he was suspended mid-air. Aragus slammed his weapon into the ground next to my head, and sprung off of it up to Lorgani's platform. He must have been a few seconds too late. The platform exploded. The column of ash reached up, launching the two into the air. Aragus fell back into the pit, coughing violently as he stood. The legionnaires scrambled to defend themselves, but the assassins had already cut most of them down. Without Lorgani, they had fallen into disarray and were easily finished. Aragus ran over to us. "Well, if it isn't my new favorite outsiders. We failed to kill Lorgani, but we still dealt quite a blow. Many legionnaires are out of service, and we gave her new friend a little scare as a bonus. Who was he, anyway?" "He's with us. And it would seem he's fooled her into letting him cozy up to her. However, he isn't nearly as friendly to her as he's letting on, and I do believe that his position is just what your Lawton needs. We just have to give him an opportunity to strike. You got any ideas about how we can do that?" Aragus smiled. "Of course I do. But first, let us resupply. I'd rather not fight her in these rags. My brethren, who form the old guard, have a little hideout in the ashen wastes. We can resupply there." The matter was settled. Daniel. I flew through the air in Lorgani's embrace, clinging to her with more strength than I knew I had when we began to fall. Lorgani only held me more tightly. I noticed that we were flying toward the throne room. The ash blanketing the place began to stir, and soon we were being pelted with little particles. The ash cleared itself from the throne room, rising in a great upward blast to slow our descent, before circling back down to be reused as a large cushion. We landed relatively softly, and Lorgani sat me down upon her throne. She did not sit, choosing instead to arch her back and smile at the sky. "Ha! I did it!" She looked back down at me, that lone green eye brimming over with the collective joy of 3 lifetimes. "I've never tried that maneuver before. A bit too risky for me to justify doing it for fun, but the risk was well worth it to protect you. That old man saw you with me, and he would have cut you down in seconds if I wasn't so kind as to save you. By the way, I'm not going to demand any sort of payment for that. Your life is my property, so I was really only defending myself just then." Lorgani leaned over me, pressing a hand into my shoulder. Her euphoria seemed only to increase as she drew closer. "Of course, If you can think of some way to express your gratitude for that, I wouldn't mind at all. I'd just let it happen. At that moment, I felt an overwhelming pressure. I had to do something. Regardless of our relationship, I owed her my life. Given that she seemed to want action more than words this time, I considered my options carefully. Did she want me to treat her as a leader or as a lover? Her smile, her stance, her body being so close to mine, I couldn't read her. I couldn't figure her out. All I could do was choose an option that could satisfy both and hope that it worked. Redo from all I could do in 3, 2, 1. All I could do was choose an option that could satisfy both and hope that it worked. With a slow and gentle movement, I reached for her free hand. I would kiss her hand, and that would satisfy her both as a leader and a lover. It was a messy solution, but I'm sure I'm smart enough to make it work somehow. I felt a sudden pressure, then an explosion of warmth on my face. I hadn't even realized that she had grabbed my chin and tilted my head upward until her lips were already upon mine. My brain had gone from working overtime to fully resetting in an instant. I simply didn't know what to do. What could I do? Say no? Say yes? Take things a step further? Cut them off here? Morgani must have noticed my panicked thoughts, or perhaps that my skin had taken on a crimson hue. She backed off and wiped her face with the hand which I would have kissed if she'd given me the chance. I'm sorry about that. Wait, was she apologizing? I used your body without thinking about how you might feel if I did. A wave of guilt crashed into the back of my head. It's fine, you can use my body. The words left my mouth before I could even think about what to say. Why would I say that? Morgani seemed to love it, though. She dashed right over and pulled me out of the throne and into a warm hug, holding my head against her shoulder. It was all I could do to reciprocate. For a few seconds she held me, but her arms slowly worked their way down my body, and upon reaching my waist, fell entirely to her side. I stepped back and saw that she was staring at the sky again with that wide grin. She must have found a new source of inspiration. So, I can use your body in any way I want. I can use you as a chair, as a toy, or as a weapon. It would seem that I must call upon your loyalty, darling. Would you be willing to carry a part of my blessing and wield my power in my name? I was shocked. That she would trust me with such a thing as she had demonstrated was proof that she didn't suspect a thing. My plan was going off without a hitch, and if I wanted, I could soon strike her down. I just needed for her to be truly distracted. I could not risk a stab at her back when she turned, nor could I wait for her to sleep. I had to make sure that I struck true, for I would not get a second chance. I snapped back to awareness and replied, "It would be an honor to host your strength. But how?" She laughed. "My darling, to achieve apotheosis, all you have to do is take a part of me into yourself." A chill ran down my spine, but before I could react, she had taken hold of my wrist. She formed a small blade of hardened ash in her other hand, and drew it across my arm. I cried out, the pain eclipsed only by the shock of seeing how enthusiastically my blood fled my body. She had a look of overwhelming pleasure on her face, as if watching filth being purged from me. I had experienced severe blood loss before. I knew when the numbness kicked in and my thoughts grew faint that I didn't have long, and slid to the ground. With half-blinded eyes, I saw her run the blade down her own wrist, and she held the cut on her arm up to my wound. Her thick, black blood shot into my veins, reinvigorating me. Once she was done with the transfusion, she tore off a sleeve of her gown and used it to stop the bleeding on both of our arms. It was so sweet that she'd administer the same treatment to both of us. I felt delirious, as if the blood had some intoxicating effect, yet I knew I was somehow stronger than ever before. I had transcended humanity, and now my place on a scientific chart was closer to the denizens of Sycamore, to Lorgani herself. She pulled me to my feet and let go. To my surprise, I didn't fall over. Good, you can stand. I wasn't quite sure how much that would unbalance you, or if you'd even survive. I'd only ever theorized about blessing someone in such a manner. Can you feel it? You are so much more than your human flesh now. I nodded. I really had grown. There's no time to spare. I've given you a powerful weapon, but you simply must learn how to wield it first. I should educate you slightly. You currently have a blend of my divine blood and your human blood inside your body. Therefore, you won't be nearly as strong as me with the ash, and lightning is a skill that I don't think you'll ever be able to learn. But I believe we could practice some basic ash manipulation now. Simply extend your will to include the ash as well as your own body. I was amazed, but I tried to do as she asked. I couldn't focus, though. I began to doubt myself, and whether or not I could fulfill my true goal. I still felt anemic, and her oily blood hadn't fully run its course. Lorgani growled and slapped me with overwhelming strength. I fell over, but pulled myself to my knees. The hard impact of her foot against my back sprawled me out forcefully. I tried to get back up, but before I could think, I had been hoisted aloft by my clothes. I looked at her, and her blazing eye pierced my very soul as she spoke. There's one truth you need to know above all others. Carve it into your skin if you must. A divinity holds the power to rule the world of Sycamore. Not just the people, but the very world itself. As the divinity, both the ground and the sky are my subordinates. You won't survive my world if you can't bend it to your will. At the end of the day, it's my only ally, and unless you embrace that same mentality, you're going to die out here. Now be a good little pet and kiss the ash. It might very well fall in love with you if you just try a little harder. She shoved my face back into the ground. How promiscuous of you, kissing me with such passion, then turning around and kissing the ash. Have you no shame? What will you kiss next? My fist? A lightning bolt? Will you go and kiss that old man who wanted to kill you, who I saved you from? No, I want to kiss you again. I took a deep breath and willed the ash to rise with all of my mental fortitude. I could do this. She believed in me, so of course I could. The ashen ground stirred, and small pillars rose up, about a foot in height and 4 inches in diameter. Shock took over my mind, and the ash fell once more. Lorgani gasped, then moved over to me. Excellent work, darling. I'm quite proud. Of course, that was rather feeble, so you will need to train. I'll whip you into shape, literally if I must. You will be a perfect vessel for my power. When we have conquered your earth, I will teach you the full extent of the strength you now bear. Only then, all right? I can't have you thinking you're my equal and betraying me at the last moment. I opened my mouth to speak, then thought otherwise. Perhaps it would be better to serve her. I would have a much better life, and never have to worry about stealing ever again. My new home would be rather nice, and Lorgani would be satisfied to live peacefully with me. Well, perhaps not, but with this power at our disposal, would it really matter? Ben. Our goose led us out into the wastes, almost out of view of the city. We approached a hill, which had a few holes in the top, as if some sort of insects were nested there. In a flash of gray, he grabbed us and pulled us up under his cloak. Stay still. We sat there in silence for a moment as something approached, then left. What was that? I asked, dreading some giant beast that could eat the three of us in one bite. Legion Patrol. She's grown more paranoid as the years go on, and rightfully so. We've been picking away at her forces from just outside their doorstep. Recently, most of her soldiers aren't present in the city at any one given time. They're usually out hunting us. Or, well, that's for another time. We had an ambush set up at that pit, but didn't account for your presence at that meeting. However, your friend fought quite well, so I've decided to let you in on our operation, instead of sending you back through you-know-what. He stood up and looked around, then called softly. The rest of the procession followed as Aragus led us closer to the hill. The gray plants grew more thickly around the hill, and soon our view was almost entirely obscured. We came upon a hole in the side of the hill and followed the tunnel inward. It opened up into a large cavern, with a couple of smaller chambers dug into the walls, illuminated by the holes in the roof as lightning flashed above. Aragus led us to his armory, and we donned the gray cloaks and armor of his assassins. I had no idea how to fight with these bizarre weapons, so I resolved to simply blend in. Hopefully I could hide my injuries and lack of skill underneath the thick gray cloth. I drank with a few of the men to put my mind at ease, but I couldn't hold more than one tiny stone bottle's worth of their Zythor. Whatever they were drinking, it was too strong for me. It sure perked me up, though, so it must have been packed with nutrients. As I walked to the small room where Aragus told us we'd be sleeping, Clara approached me. Ben, she bowed her head. You do actually trust Daniel, right? You didn't just say that so that they wouldn't leave us, did you? She looked up, and I saw tears form in her eyes. I knew I had to say something, but I couldn't find the words. Whatever was on her mind, I was clearly the last person she should look to for comfort. I inhaled deeply and rested my hand on her shoulder. Mr. Smythe and I met at a bar. I was drinking myself silly, knowing all too well that I'd be too poor to pay for a single drop. The bartender caught on and was about to throw me out, when he stepped in. He paid my tab for the night, and asked why I was partaking in such a nasty habit. But you see, I wasn't able to afford a home. I slept on the streets, and the only thing to keep me warm at night was a strong drink. He offered me a chance to get rich, told me about some dead man with a fancy house, and our failed heist is how we met you. The point is, Mr. Smythe would never turn against me. He's my friend, and he'd never hurt me. And judging by the way he talked to you, he'd never hurt you either. He's a proper gentleman. Wouldn't hurt anything or anyone that didn't attack him first. Clara wiped the tears from her eyes, which quickly welled back up. But are you sure? Are you sure that he'll keep his end of our bargain? Life in your world sounds so precious. I long to live that way, where not every day is a struggle for survival. Now I know that I can. My life in the cave seems like a living hell in retrospect. I need to know that my struggle to improve my life is not worthless. Now I had proof. I thought that she was complex, like Mr. Smythe, but now I knew that she was just as simple as me. I should have known all along that distrusting her was silly, but I wanted to show Mr. Smythe that I really wasn't stupid. Now I'd proven myself the fool once again. There was only one way to remedy the situation now, and that was to give Clara my absolute trust. I'd tell her everything. Clara, I'm sorry. I may have misled you just then. Mr. Smythe may look the part, but he's a ruffian at heart, and he may actually sell us out. I have faith that he won't, but my instincts have never been a reliable guide, and there's no telling what that woman's been doing to him. However, I can still bring you back with me. There's a great deal of wealth that only Mr. Smythe and me know about. I might not be able to show you as much beauty in our world as Mr. Smythe would, but I can keep you safe. I owe you my life, and will do my best to repay that debt in full. Clara choked back another sob, then curled her lips into a thin smile. Thank you. She turned and walked toward the sleeping quarters. Clara. I woke to a loud commotion. The assassins were all sitting about the living quarters, talking amongst themselves. Our goose shouted in from the main room. Come in here. It's time. I jumped up and walked inside. Our goose was bent over a makeshift map, which he had drawn out on the floor. I've found out so much in the past few days, and have devised a plan to kill Lorgani and free us all. Our new friends, Ben and Clara, have come from elsewhere, the land of Earth. Lorgani has had her mind set on conquest for some time now, ever since discovering their world. Furthermore, she has completed certain research into these rifts, and found a way to weaponize it. As of now, she could artificially create a rift, large enough to ram the entire Legion through at once and take Earth by storm. From what Ben told me, they would stand no chance against the full might of Psyche-Near. Yet still, there is hope for both worlds. The latest patrol of scouts have found where she's planning to open this rift. On the mountainside opposite the city lies a small valley. This valley seemed empty, but we saw a patrol of legionnaires driving a small group of slaves into the valley. Upon further investigation, we discovered that they were building a strange pedestal with a receptacle on top. I now have no doubt that this is where Lorgani intends to open her rift. Now that we have the upper hand, if we can get there first, we can set a trap for her. However, we would need to wait until she tries to open the rift before we would be able to strike. For our ambush to have maximum effect, her focus must be fully off of us. We will need to lie far enough away to where she can't recognize our gray cloaks, and that would take being out of earshot. I do remember the rifts having some connection to the lightning that dances throughout our sky, and she will likely call upon this at some point. That will be our cue. It is certain that she will have mustered all her strength there. Today we must employ every weapon at our disposal. Hold nothing back. Any questions? Everyone was silent. Well then, let us depart. Daniel. Lorgani led me up to a stone pedestal which loomed over the masses. The entire legion had marched here with us, about 1,000 strong. To be honest, I was beginning to have my doubts that they could truly conquer Earth. The presence of Lorgani would more than make up for that. She would destroy armies, and the legion would restore order. Our divinity reached up and plucked the gem from her diadem, then placed it atop the pedestal. The gem commanded my attention, and I heard a soft noise coming from it. The vibration sounded like a bell's toll, or perhaps a woman's quietest soprano. Lorgani turned to her soldiers and began to speak. Once, Sykenir was a beautiful place, a land populated by master artisans and farmers, who ensured that not only could we live and breathe as we please, but that the very land itself was at peace. Once, Sykenir was a beautiful place, a land populated by master artisans and farmers, who ensured that not only could we live and breathe as we please, but that the very land itself was at peace. 1 millennium ago, 2 divinities clashed, and the great war that resulted left our ancestors with only one option. They dug deep into the ash, and hoped beyond hope that the endless fires and storms would not wipe out the last of the Sykenirans. When the flames died, they came back to the surface, and built their homes wherever they could, inventing little miracles like Zythor, to replace the dwindling supplies of food that could never grow again. All that remains is us, the lone city and people of Sykenir, and the few beasts out there who were too tough for the end of the world to kill. None are alive to remember those days now. Even I have seen little more than scant evidence of our history. Only myths passed down through the royal lineage truly remain. As both your divinity and a fellow denizen of Sykenir, I assure you, we shall not be forced underground again. It should be quite clear to every one of you that we cannot risk such a fate. We've come so far, but our lives are little more than a constant fight for survival in this shattered place. That is why I've gathered you here. Paradise is nearly our reality. We have found a path to a new world, one of bountiful pastures and clean skies, a world like the glorious Sykenir of old. The people there are small and weak, relying on their tools to keep their society alive. The strongest of their kind that I have encountered submitted himself to me almost immediately. They are no match for us. We, who forged ourselves to be as severe as the world we were born in. Each of you legionnaires are worth 20 of them. Naturally, I'll fight alongside you, so if we face more than 20,000, I'll take care of the rest. The crowd laughed uproariously at this one, but having seen her in action, I didn't think she was joking. Now we strike! My legion stands, ready to fight for the very soul of Sykenir. We shall claim this new land as our own, For as the superior species, it is our birthright to dominate the weak. We will seize this paradise and begin anew. After all, there is no other path for us to take. I place my faith in you, honorable warriors of Sycanir. Do what you must. Divinity was an apt title for this woman. Her words shook the crowd like gospel, and the woman herself was positively radiant. Her charisma was undeniable, and despite her cruelty upon our first meeting, I could feel that her heart was pure. Lorgani lowered her voice and turned to me. Her eye stared lovingly into mine. You, darling, have yet to truly prove yourself. I hope that you won't disappoint me after all of the time I spent on you. Another test of my resolve. This is a simple matter of stealing what rightfully belongs to us. I can handle it, as long as I've got... 3, 2, 1. This is a simple matter of stealing what rightfully belongs to us. I can handle it, as long as I've got you by my side. My comment seemed to satisfy her. She turned back to the gem. Stand back, darling. This will be dangerous. Let the essence of the sky open the gate to paradise. I could tell that she was about to unleash some real power, and stepped about 10 feet back. The storm intensified overhead. Lightning bolts violently struck the gem directly, and it began to take on a white glow. Lorgani paused and looked to the mountain. A single figure stood on the mountain's ash-covered slopes. It was one of the assassins in their signature gray cloak. He raised his spear and let out a war cry, which echoed down the hill. I recognized from the voice that it was the old man underneath the camouflage. 20, maybe 30 more stood up around him, picking up their own spears and daggers. They cried in response for all of 5 seconds before coming to an abrupt halt. The leader took a step toward us, immediately bursting into a harrowing sprint down the mountainside. This madman was actually running down a mountain at us. The others must have had a death wish as they followed closely behind him. Some staggered and fell, but not enough to make any real difference. Close ranks! Form a defensive line! The words had escaped my mouth before I could think. Lorgani looked down at me with her jaw hanging limply from her skull. I bowed my head, and to my delight she applauded. Well, darling, perhaps you'll prove more useful than I thought. Legionnaires, follow this man's orders as if he was me. The legion formed a phalanx between us, but the assassins still pressed the attack. Maybe they knew they couldn't stop running without the momentum carrying them off their feet. Or maybe they still thought they could take us. They grew even closer now, unfaltering in their goal. Still, these were clearly survivors. They wouldn't be foolish enough for a suicidal charge. They split, and I saw their true motive. They would rush around the line and attack Lorgani. I spoke again to the troops. Break formation and fall back! Protect your divinity at all costs! They snapped into action and retreated, but the assassins were now almost upon us, reforming into a single wedge, and again rushing the center now that the legion had begun to panic. Their spears glinted in the dim light, and their eyes shone with cold vengeance. Damn it all! I thought I was clever, but their leader, that crazy old man, was one step ahead of me the whole way. They sped up, rushing the legion as they tried and failed to reform the line. The assassins leapt into and above us, their spiked boots flashing wickedly. The great gray owls caught more than their fair share. The legion struck out and hit some, but they turned away the blows. Their cloaks tore off to reveal thick stone pauldrons and gauntlets concealed underneath. The Legion was losing soldiers quickly, but held fast for now. Lorgani hurled great spears of ash at the assassins. The Legion was picking them apart slowly. We were still losing soldiers far too quickly. If this kept up, we might lose the battle. I drew my sword from my cane and pulled a chunk of ash into my hand, sharpening it into something resembling a throwing knife. As I picked out a target, I raised my arm to throw, but stopped, dead in my tracks. My target's face, it was mostly concealed, but I could tell from the skin that it was Clara. So they were among these gray ranks. I would have to be careful to avoid hurting them. But that thought made me pause, considering again Lorgani's offer. Was Ben so important that I should put him above myself? Was Clara? No, I wouldn't let them stand in my way. If I let them die here, I could live on as a prince, or perhaps a god. Why would I stand in Lorgani's way of making this dream come true? As I had done with Clara, she was offering me a better life. The key difference was that, while all I could offer was the basic dignity of any man, Lorgani offered paradise to me and her people. Truly, she was a good person, and a good ruler. I would kiss her again when all this is over. I would give her my whole body, and most of my soul as well. I drew my arm back again, and let the knife fly. It embedded itself in Clara's shoulder. Her screams were like a symphony, heralding my ascension. I looked down at the field below. The Legion fought valiantly, keeping the traitors away from her divine grace. Surely they loved her, for they gave their lives so readily to protect her. Her strength was proven. She let even more of her power show now, as she had forsaken the ash, and was now leaping up and down, calling forth bolts of lightning in her entrancing aerial dance. A bead of sweat formed on her brow. I realized that she was growing desperate, and strained herself to fend off these attackers. I had to help her. I scooped up a large clump of ash in my hand, and leapt into the fray. I threw it into the face of an assassin, following it up with a plunge of my blade which caught him squarely in the chest. Another came close, sweeping at me with his spear. I ducked below, and a bolt of lightning struck him as his swing flew over my head. Even now Lorgani protected me. I looked back at her and smiled. She spared me a graceful wave before resuming her assault. I turned back and saw the old man from the pit leaping forward. He brought his spear around in a wide arc, and I tried to step back, but the spike on the side caught my chest. I felt it penetrate my skin, but it didn't go deep. I realized that the stolen wallet in my pocket must have cushioned the blow and given me a second chance. Oh, what divine providence! Reaching downward, I focused my will, allowing all my hatred for these blasphemous traitors to flow into the ash. How could they dare to attack Lorgani? Don't they see that she's the best thing for all of us? My faith, my ambition, and my love were absolute. No other thoughts appeared in my mind. Salvation for all Psychnerans would be achieved right here, right now. As my hands met the ground, the ashen battlefield exploded into a massive cloud. The old man was flung away, and nothing else came through the ash. Had I ended it here? Was the battle over? No, not yet. Ben and Clara called through the smoke. I bit back a reply, willing myself to ignore them. Lorgani hummed a soft, gentle tune. I couldn't recognize it. It must be Psychoneran music. She walked into view, a sword forming in her hand. Ben and Clara still called, but Lorgani remained relaxed, strolling through the cloud. The ash was settling now, and they came into view. Legionnaires and assassins alike had been stunned into submission by the explosion. It was just us now. I pulled myself to my feet and followed along. Ben and Clara stopped, staring at Lorgani, who ran her fingers along the blade to taunt them. Clara rushed in, stone knives glinting as she charged. She attacked with a long flurry of blows, but Lorgani was unfazed, dodging and deflecting each strike with apparent ease. She lunged forward, bowling over the smaller Clara. Lorgani followed by slamming her left hand into Clara's belly, a brutal punch that hit with the weight of a goddess's wrath. Clara didn't even have it in her to scream. The girl dropped as silently and as clumsily as if she had been decapitated. As she lay there, I saw her reach for a small flask, but remained silent. She could be dealt with later. Lorgani took no notice of this either, and focused instead on Ben, who was backing up quite rapidly. I drew the black knife, as my sword was gone, and followed a bit more closely. I ignored the wounded Clara as I passed. She was out of the fight for now, but I sensed that my part in this might not be over yet. Ben poked at Lorgani with his spear, wincing as he did so. He must have opened up the gash on his belly with such a quick motion. She sidestepped the thrust and caught the handle as she passed, ripping the weapon away from him in seconds. She sliced at his foot and cut deep, spraying the ash with bright scarlet. He fell over, crying as he tried to flee. He scrambled back, only succeeding in forcing himself against a large rock. He looked over to me, and as his gaze caught mine, I wished with all my heart that I could disappear back into the ash. Was this shame? Mr. Smythe? He called to me, and I looked away, cursing under my breath. As tears formed in my eyes, Lorgani raised her blade to strike. I felt my body to be possessed by some external will. Dagger in hand, I rushed up behind Lorgani, and felt my lofty dreams burn away into ashes as I plunged the weapon into her back. She turned very slowly, black blood covering the ground behind her. She turned very slowly, black blood covering the ground behind her. The knife dislodged from her chest as she moved, and I held it loosely, my arms limp. She stumbled forward and caught herself on my shoulder. I expected her eye to burn with the fury of 1,000 dying suns, but her face retained a sense of serene beauty. She coughed, blood running down her chin. Even through the bleeding, she still had it in her to smile at me. "What did you go and do that for? Why the change of heart?" I couldn't answer at first. It felt like it had been my decision, but from outside of my mind rather than inside. Perhaps it was the old me who made that choice. "I don't know," I replied. "Just didn't feel right to watch him die." She continued the dialogue, but her mouth didn't move. I could hear her voice inside my head. "You're so human. Can't you see that I am what holds this world together? I am Lorgani. I am the divinity of Sychnir. This is farewell. For now, darling. I'll be seeing you soon. Daniel Smythe. She fell over, dead. I screamed in desperation. What have you done? Answer me! But no answer came. She was dead. Even her ashen shell had fallen away. As I looked closer, I saw that the knife wound had begun to dissolve her flesh, as if the blade possessed some sort of necrotic quality. Ben screamed as he watched her flesh and bones melt away, leaving nothing behind but the gemless diadem, a small puddle of black fluids, and a vile smell that overpowered even the pungent ash. The old man walked over. Fine work, friend. For many years we tried to overthrow her. She's taken so many precautions that our stunt at the pit was the closest we've gotten to reaching her in a long time. You've managed to accomplish what Sychnir's finest soldiers couldn't. But surely she wouldn't let you in that deep without some precautions. Did she do anything particularly strange to you? My name is Daniel Smythe. Where's Clara? I pressed as I looked around for her. A hand tapped my shoulder. I turned to see Clara, relatively unharmed. The rip in her clothes where she had been punched showed only a light bruise. A little Sychniran medicine. The old man had evident pride in his voice. It's very hard to make and incredibly rare. Even so, it can keep a wound from getting too nasty if you're quick with it. Your friend will be quite fine. Not only that, but she told me everything I need to know about you as a person. Now answer my question. Did she try anything? I thought for a moment, then realized the implications. I wondered what the man might do if he knew. No, not that I can recall. Why? The old man looked suspicious, but continued. The divinity has this sort of power over those who share her blood. Usually this simply increases her natural charisma when addressing her subjects. However, the closer her blood ties, the more influence she can exert. I barely kept myself and my personal squadron from being swayed through rigorous mental training. It's why the Legion was so willing to die for her, and why I'm not too worried about the survivors of this battle. They'll come around when they've shaken the last of her influence. As for you, you're obviously not Sychniran, so you should be safe from her subjugation. Still, I can't help but wonder, why would she let you get so close to her? The old man glared at me as if he suspected the transfusion, but after a few seconds of me not reacting, he gave up. Meh, I suppose it's not a problem now. She's dead, and that's all I need to restore some semblance of order around here. I shuddered. I had felt such righteousness in Lorgani's cause. I had ignored Ben and Clara, not caring for their very survival. Was it possible that Lorgani's influence was what brought this on? A burst of clarity hit me. For the past day, my thoughts were not my own. Somehow she had gotten into my mind and altered my nature. That's why my decision to betray her felt like an outside will. It was my will, but it wasn't the primary will within me. Now that I couldn't feel her presence anymore, I had returned to my true self. Wet, icy fingers ran down my back as my mind filled with dreadful thoughts of what could have happened were she still alive. I looked down at the puddle again, reaffirming myself as the foul liquid soaked into the ground. We'll need to be going. Thank you for your concern. Should any issues arise, send a messenger through the rift. I perked back up, gaining some inspiration that I hadn't felt in a while. Good luck convincing them to let you on that throne. He laughed along with my joke. I am Aragus. I led the finest band of warriors ever known. I am a hero to the people, and that's far better than a divinity. I will have no problem walking through the front gate and being welcomed as a king. Now that the tyrant's gone, I can focus on civil matters. Farewell, Ben and Clara. I hope that we can meet again, under friendlier circumstances. As do I. Now I do believe it's time we got back to what's important. After all, we still have an arrangement to fulfill. Daniel Smythe, you promised that you would bring me food and water. My ensuing smile was soaked in warmth and love. Clara, my friend, you've earned all that I promised you and more. In fact, I would like to formally invite you to live with me and Ben. We've got ourselves a pretty nice setup above ground. She nodded, a river of tears flowing down her face. Very well. Although I have much to teach you about my world. Civilized society won't think too highly of a cannibalistic cave dweller. It'll be an arduous task, for sure. But for you, I'm willing to see it through. Clara wiped her tears. Of course I'm willing to learn. Ben, if you're ready, we should go. I turned away from them and scooped up a handful of ash. It was still a bit hard for me to control, but thinking of Lorgani allowed me to shape it into a ball. I slipped said ball into my pocket, thinking about the potential uses for such a substance. As I turned back to my friends, I announced, "Let's go home!" As we began the journey back to Earth, the vibrant colors of summer danced through my mind. Epilogue. Daniel. Carson Willis had seen the rift. I hated that we had shown another civilian the rift, but there was no other way to convince him to let us have the house. He was so overcome by the incomprehensible secret of the home that he couldn't bear to hold on to it, prompting us to conclude our business upstairs in the parlor. And these people, you're sure that they won't come through, kill someone else? For now, though any interlopers could unbalance this situation. That is why we simply must have this house. You can take anything you want from inside. I'll even give you the money that your father left for us, if that makes things better. Now, Mr. Smythe, I am a firm believer that there are some things which mankind should simply never know about. The folly of humans delving into the unknown will surely bring about our ruin some day. You've already seen the other side, and you tell me you're willing to stand guard against any threat involving this here secret, so I'll let you have the house. Just give me whatever cash you left you. I'm sure that'll be enough of a profit. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry it came to this, Mr. Willis. Here's the money. I tried my best to console him, fumbling in my pocket for a moment and withdrawing $5,000. He took the cash, tears welling in his eyes. Good day, sir! With that final wish, Carson Willis fled through the front door. I walked up and closed it behind him. Laughing silently, I tucked the other half of Willis's inheritance deeper into my coat. I wondered for a second what he was planning, but there was no time to react. I sprang into action, bringing the blade of my staff around to face him. I thrust forward, but he deflected my blow with his tongue. Not good. Listen here now. I don't care who or what you are. I suffered for many years fighting daily just... break my cheek. To replace the dwindling supplies of food that could never grow again, Ulu.